When are we live?
Oh, we're already live.
Oh, we're already live?
Well,
Oh my,
yeah, I've been streaming since 8 o'clock this morning. I stream
oh my, oh my goodness.
every morning from 8 o'clock till noon. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you knew this. Maybe I should go first. My name is Danny Taro, aka my homie too Taro, and I am a Twitch streamer. I stream every weekday morning from 8 o'clock till noon, and we cover Canadian politics every morning. We also just listen to some music, drink some coffee, watch some clownfish or whatever kind of video flow in the background, and at 9 o'clock, we go through the Canadian headlines and try to figure out what's going on in Canada. I'm from Peterborough. I work for the Arthur newspaper. You're my boss, although that doesn't seem to really properly define our relationship. There's been moments where I've been part of the board of the Arthur, so where I was your boss. Well, not your boss, but whoever was holding your position at the time. I was their boss, and they were my boss. So, but really, we're just, I think, comrades and
Yeah, I was.
allies in this Peterborough political climate. So yeah, obviously I work for the Arthur, so I have a bias towards them, because I love them and I design the website and do stuff like that. I'm not so much a journalist for the Arthur, really. I've written a couple articles, but I don't consider myself a journalist. Okay, so it's up to you. We are live.
I love it. Just throw me right in. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been looking forward to this since we talked last week and uh, trying to make this happen. My name is Sebastian Johnston-Lindsay. I am the coordinating editor of Arthur newspaper, and I'm enrolled in my PhD as well at Trent University in Canadian Studies, and so that kind of impacts kind of my coverage and interests to a certain degree. Um, the main thing that I've been doing these past few months is covering City Hall politics and all of its manifestations, and how it kind of affects the Trent community, and how Trent and the city of Peterborough have this interesting relationship that I'm trying to get a greater understanding of. And what I'm primarily interested in is allowing students to access the information that is available at City Hall, but might not be available to them in uh, might be behind paywalls, for example, on the Examiner website or something like that. Because so much of what happens at City Hall does affect Trent students. When you think about transit, um, that's an ongoing issue that I really try to bring attention to, right?
Yeah.
Any potential biases? Obviously, I work for Arthur, and I am a Trent student, and so that's going to inform probably where my loyalties lie. Um, yeah. Was there
For
anything
sure.
else that you wanted me to outline, get out there?
I guess we could also just do like what are our pronouns?
Oh, he, him.
Yeah, and I'm he him as well. So just a bunch of he hims here.
Just some he, hims hanging out.
That's right. Um and yeah, so I mean you've been doing amazing work, kind of doing what uh a lot of us struggle to do, which is follow municipal politics. And you've been watching really closely. So I thought since this is our first like episode, and I think this is something that we want to be doing every week. So like maybe you could do us a favor and like catch us up on what has kind of happened so far during Peterborough municipal politics, like this season. Like if you were to do like a season recap, like we're just tuning in to like the latest episode, like could you maybe walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as most people will probably know, we have a new council that was elected in October. And so I started at Arthur in August. And so my first real task or beat was to cover the municipal election. And so I interviewed all the mayoral candidates and spoke with and kind of got a sense of some of the councillor candidates. And since then, since there were two meetings in December of last year, and the primary focus of those tended to be passing motions, or the attempt to pass motions that were put forward by Alex Burke and one by Joy LaChica, to address the homelessness crisis. And so some of that kind of came, both of them were voted down, right? So the city of Peterborough was asked repeatedly to donate 100,000, not donate, but to provide $100,000 out of the Social Security fund, which amounts to about 5% of the total fund. So if we can all do the math there, to provide more adequate services for our homeless community in Peterborough. Those were both unsuccessful. And so that's kind of where I began attending council meetings, at the first two council meetings of this council. And since then, since coming back in January, council was, sorry, I'm just going to close down my Slack here.
No worries, it happens.
That's a distraction. That's going to go off a lot. So after the winter break, council reconvened, or rather the finance committee reconvened to go through the budget process. And that's really where I kind of had a trial by fire sort of thing, like to kind of, because I'm not a journalist by any training. I never went to journalism school or anything like that. My background's in English literature. And so I have been doing a lot of learning, and I'm still perpetually learning exactly how the machinations of municipal government work. But what was so fascinating during the budget process is they go line by line through every single spending measure, right? And some of the coverage that I've done over the past month or so has been focusing on those discussions and where the priorities of council really lie, and trying to relate that to the lives of Trent students, really. Some of the major issues that have come forward have been, like I already mentioned, transit, but again, homelessness. And then of course you've done a really good video on well, some of the progressive candidates have been having a rather tough time of passing progressive legislation, and this is something that I've had conversations with the previous mayor, Diane Tarian, about, right? And I interviewed her and kind of got a sense of what she expected coming out of this. So we have a new budget in Peterborough. Council managed to bring it down from a 4% tax levy increase to 3.15. And one of the main ways that they did that was freezing transit funding at 2022 levels for 2023, barring a report, which at one point was supposed to be coming in March. But topically, at the previous council general committee meeting last week, and they're going to vote on it next week, they're probably going to delay that until September, which effectively means that we're not going to see any changes to transit until the summer of 2024, if that passes.
Okay, so just to confirm there, because I mean, I'm sure I don't really know how all this stuff works, and you're probably have a better grasp on it. So you said something, they reduced the levy from 4% to 3.5%.
3.15. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, 3.15. Now, what
Yeah.
exactly is that levy? That's the levy for transit specifically, or?
So that is the property tax increase across the city.
Okay.
So more or less, really the only way that the city has to generate income of its own accord, right?
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So they've reduced that by cutting transit, or not necessarily cutting, but freezing, which is the same as temporarily cutting.
Right. And that's where it gets into some interesting semantics. And this is where a lot of counselors will go back and forth during, these meetings can last upwards of 7 hours at times, right? Where they discuss and we'll talk about whether or not this is a cut. And depending upon there's no real political affiliations, but in terms of like the political spectrum, right? Like they will say whether or not it's a cut or not. It's technically a freeze, but it is what amounts to a cut in the inflationary period that we find ourselves in currently, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot of questions about how exactly the transit system that we currently have, which I'm sure a lot of the people watching will recognize is not exactly functioning in a great way, in an ideal way, how it's going to get any better if we're operating with the same amount of money as last year, when that money doesn't go far, right?
Yeah, that money's not even going far enough as it is. Obviously, inflation is skyrocketing during this time. So this is a cut in like multiple ways, because it's not even keeping pace with inflation as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess how does this really affect Trent students, which obviously is part of your scope as a student journalist? And I would say I know you maybe you don't consider yourself a journalist, but I feel like you've done a fantastic job. If this is your first time dabbling in that realm, I think you really are like doing a fantastic job. A lot more than I think any of the past editors. You have really dug into city council. So I think that's really impressive because as you said, 7 hour meeting or whatever, like these things are not easy for the average person to kind of like participate in and digest easily. So thank you so much for your work. But yeah, how do you think this transit cut is affecting Trent students or Fleming students or high school students or the city kind of as a whole?
Yeah, so I think the main way is, and this is based on my understanding as someone who's very fortunate in that I get to walk around the city most of the time, and I have a vehicle as well. And so since as a graduate student, I don't automatically get put into the transit system, but as someone who has formerly depended upon the public transit prior to the pandemic, um, I recognize I exactly how it would impact how the constant cancellations and the way in which those cancellations are being communicated to students, but also vulnerable members of the community who can't afford to drive. I mean,
Right.
it's it it all falls downhill, right? I feel like this is going to, and this was said at council by city staff, and this is one of the most interesting things that I've tried to make sense of, is that at every council meeting, councillors during their discussions can call upon city staff to say, how would this decision, if we were to go ahead with this, how would this impact upon your work, but then also the community? And they had city staff members there saying that in all likelihood, a freeze to transit funding would result in immediate cuts to service and probable job layoffs for transit workers, which would then feed back into more cancellations.
Yeah.
Right. And when I reached out to Corey McLeod, who's the president of the local ATU here, Amalgamated Transit Union, he was saying, hopefully this won't be the case, and I'm going to, play this by ear, but and do our best to make sure that this doesn't happen. However, he was kind of guarded in his his statements, right? Like he wants to present a positive attitude, but the underlying understanding based upon what city staff were saying is that this is going to have a deeply negative impact on the level of service in the community, right?
Right.
Which is, of course, that's going to impact students' ability to either to get to school or work, or to just navigate the city in any meaningful way. And I think the same can be said for a lot of people who are unable or just don't drive, right? I feel like it creates a kind of two-tiered system, and the city is kind of catering to the quote unquote taxpayer, right? Andrew Beamer was very adamant in his defense of the taxpayer who sees empty buses driving past them every day, and he called that an insult to the taxpayer. That's a very specific kind of taxpayer. That's a property owning taxpayer, right?
Yeah.
Who in all likelihood can afford to drive.
Right.
And I say that as someone who owns a vehicle and will walk or bike around the city, but has previously depended upon transit out of preference, right? It
For
creates
sure.
a stratified community wherein students, the elderly, the disabled community are unable to navigate the city. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean my bias as well is that I'm a property owner who owns a vehicle and I live in the North End where Andrew Beamer is our city councilor. Obviously,
There we go.
it might not be hard to figure out that I didn't vote for Andrew Beamer. Um, but
There's our bias right there.
yeah, that is my bias. I didn't vote for Beamer, which I think is the good bias to have. But yeah, he seems to be one of the more conservative leaning counselors. You're right, like definitely in favor of like a certain type of taxpayer, as you say. But again, that doesn't even if Andrew Beamer is looking out for someone with my biases, I'm definitely not in solidarity with that. I know that something that was brought up by some students is that they missed their exams because there were cuts
Yep.
to transit service, and obviously, yeah, it's like you can't even meet the basic requirements as a student, and that seems like really unfortunate. The other trend that we're seeing, well, in addition to what people are calling a death spiral for transit. This is something that we covered happening in other major Canadian cities like Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. They're cutting jobs, they're cutting service times, they're making wait times longer, and basically discouraging people on all fronts, including raising the cost of riding transit. Discouraging people from using transit. So when you see that empty bus go by, a certain type of person might say, "Oh wow, what a waste of money that we are even running these buses at all." But the actual answer to this is to make the buses run more frequently, make the bus cheaper to operate, make sure that we're overstaffed, if not understaffed, when it comes to having proper like a labor force for people operating transit, right? So that, but unfortunately, Peterborough, like many other cities, is kind of like, actually I think, deeper down this death spiral, because we've divested from transit for so long.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point there too, and that the what's lost in a lot of this conversation as well, and we can't forget about them, is the transit workers themselves, right? Who
Right.
under the new system have been forced to work longer shifts and often some unpaid overtime in certain instances, right? So
Yeah.
there's a labor concern here too, right? In terms of how the transit workers are being treated in all of this as a result of cuts and city changes to the system itself, and so much of that is in direct relation to the cancellations, right? Because the transit system just doesn't have the workers. If a worker is going to call in sick, then that bus gets canceled, kind of thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's not as cut and dry as that, but that's a way of thinking about it, right? There is a labor issue here too. Um,
For sure. That's why I say we should be overstaffed, because yeah, we know
exactly.
people do get sick. It's true.
Yep.
Workers get
Surprisingly,
sick. Yeah.
yeah,
In
yeah.
this day and age as well, it shouldn't come as a surprise, right?
No,
Um,
of course, yeah. Yeah, and the change to transit came about as a result of not wanting to have people gathered at the central hub downtown, right? It transpired during COVID. Um, and so this
yes.
has opened up debate in terms of whether or not the new grid system works um, in it in a non-COVID time, right? Of course, that was voted down, and depending on who you ask, it was defeated by different segments of the Trent student population. However, as I kind of gestured, as I mentioned earlier, there will be no, if the motion that was just defined or pat or I don't even know, the exact wording for it. If it's ratified at the next meeting, this motion to delay the transit report until September, there will be no meaningful change to the transit system until next summer, based on the contracts between Trent University and the city.
Right.
So
And you mean summer 2024?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so just like a long way away.
yeah.
So just to confirm that so the trend students opposed going back to the old system, is that
Um, well, the Trent Central Student Association sent two
okay?
delegates to speak against the reversion back to the hub and spoke system,
Yeah.
arguing that the grid system was better. It just needs to be better funded. And then the
Yes.
city, during the budget process, cut, as we just recently said, froze funding
Okay.
for that, and then suggested that there should be a report and a transit liaison committee put together, uh, and that report would come out in March. The motion that's currently likely going to be ratified at the next council meeting on Monday will delay the publication of that report until September, which is of course during the school year, which means that we're back to the issue of them not being able to make any significant changes to transit during the school year. So
Okay.
we're looking at summer 2024.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, another trend that we're seeing, and maybe just a transition here,
Mhm.
is like in Toronto, they're cutting transit services and they're investing in police.
Oh,
There's a new like $48 million in Toronto that have been allocated to police. Um, are we getting a similar trend here in Peterborough, where we're underfunding transit and overfunding police?
That's a big question. The To put it simply, based on dollar figures and percentage of the changes in terms of where city council is allocating funds, the easy answer would be yes. The police budget was increased by 4% this year, which included over $1.2 million in increase to capital expenditures within the police budget. So that's things like new vehicles and just equipment for the police. But then also council approved the hiring of 11 new staff members in the latter half of 2023, which means that effectively this increase is going to be even bigger next year. Because, you know, if you only pay people for half the year, then their salaries aren't going to have as much of an impact in the current budget year, but the next budget year, when they're being paid for a full year's salary, it's going to have significant impacts, right? And the police are also within this budget, they're drawing down $800,000 from their reserve funds too, which will in all likelihood not be available in the next budget year as well. And so this is really setting us up to have an even larger increase next year. So while simultaneously they're granting a $1.2 million increase to the police budget, they're reducing by about $1 million the investment in transit, is basically how the money works out. Again, it's not as if it's that cut and dry, but it is. It's the optics are that they're reducing investing in transit to increase. It's not directly that they're taking it from transit and giving it to the police, but the way that they're moving the money around would suggest that exactly what you suggested is true. Only 5 of the new hires for 2023, as per the budget recommendations for the police, are uniformed officers. The rest are support staff within. So just to be clear, there's not going to be 11 new police officers in Peterborough.
Okay, but there will be 5 uniformed
there will be 5
officers and I guess 6, as you say, support staff. So
yeah.
What is the city doing to justify, like, why do we need 5 new officers and 6 new support staff? And what will those support staff do? Do you know?
Yes. So the interesting thing about the passing of the police budget at council was that it was the only one that was not immediately accepted for information. So during the budget process, community groups like the police and the paramedics and public health come forward and present their budget to the council, right? And the council will then vote to receive that information for their own purposes. When they go through the budget, they can refer back to that presentation. Okay. The only report from any community group that wasn't immediately accepted for information was the police budget. And when I spoke to Jeff Leal, he said that
who is the mayor, just for people who don't know.
Who is the mayor? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So when I spoke to Mayor Leal, he said that he did this primarily because we have a new chief of police, Stuart Betts, and he had just been sworn in the day before the police budget presentation. So council basically said, okay, we want to hear more from Chief Betts, right? That was basically what we want. We want to allow the new chief of police to come to explore this and see if there's any way that he can make changes to this. And when 2 weeks later, when Chief Betts came back to make this presentation, he doubled down on it. Like he made 0 changes to it. And basically the reasons why, getting to your actual question, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context there. That council did request that they go back and sort of go through it. He came back outlining a significant increase in calls for service, as well as a significant decrease in what his report called weighted clearance rate. So more or less saying, and I should also say that severity of crime, the police's data is suggesting it is up. These are all kind of narratives that you see in other jurisdictions as well, you know. However, within the context of Peterborough, this is the overarching argument for why we need more police and why uniformed officers, I should say, and why we might need more people behind the scenes, specifically like some of the positions are, and this is a major thing too, because there's about 13 or 14 officers who are currently off on long-term disability.
Okay.
And this caused some debate within council as well by basically saying what is being done by your force to ensure that these people, these officers who are off sick for whatever reason, whether it's PTSD or an injury which occurred on the job, what's being done by your force to ensure that they're able to come back. And part of the some of the positions within this budget suggest that there'll be positions to aid in that, right? So that we're getting people back on this on the streets more or less, or at least in the office carrying out duties associated with policing. Um,
Okay, so
so
just to confirm, we have support staff for police officers who have PTSD,
yes,
but those support staff they wouldn't be helpful to people in the community suffering from mental health issues. Just the police staff itself.
that is my understanding that they would be primarily allocated towards uh, aiding in the police. Yeah.
Okay, very very interesting. Okay, um,
Yes. And kind of related to that, there was a fairly significant win, which again was brought forward by Alex Burke, um, in terms of the Downtown Business Improvement Association, right? The DBIA.
okay,
Um, they had a proposal to hire a community liaison worker who would effectively carry out a similar task to what you just kind of outlined there, right? Like someone to help support members of the community who are facing homelessness and mental health crises on the streets, right? And they would be employed by the DBIA. What Alex Burke ended up managing to do, by some, it wasn't actually him. I believe it was Keith Riel who passed the motion to axe that position from the DBIA's budget. And then Alex Burke kind of jumped in and passed a motion to grant that to the Wolf Street shelters for more staff at shelters.
okay.
It's an interesting little thing, interesting little piece of political. I don't know what the right word is. Like, it was an interesting political maneuver to witness in real time. That's all. That's what I can say.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Okay. So is it allocating some of the DBIA's resources to the Wolf Street shelter.
Yeah, so at this point, it would have been city funds that might have been allocated towards the DBIA had it passed as it was initially stated. However, the city decided to um, deny might be too strong a word, but to strike that from the DBIA's budget and then with that money reallocate it. Again, it's all kind of imaginary, right? Because this isn't money that hasn't been spent yet, right? It's all planning for the future year to
Right,
allow
right.
for the hiring of two new staff at the Wolf Street and Brock mission.
Okay. So a small victory. Um,
A very small victory, but a significant one nonetheless. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, what is just so stark to me is that, the amount of resources we're willing to commit to policing and the mental health of police officers, when we're not willing to really fight the root of the problem, which I think, advocates for these causes, we all kind of know that we're not going to be able to police our way out of poverty, or the actual things that contribute to more crime, right? Like they can say crime is up, but they won't say why crime is up, and what we're going to actually do to solve it. So I wish we were addressing the root of the problem personally, and it seems like we're really not doing that. So we know that a lot of the counselors, the more conservative counselors, have been super, I would say, even like aggressive against people suffering from homelessness or people who are suffering from addiction. Do you have any kind of like summary of what has kind of happened so far with that? Obviously, Counselor Alex Burke, has been like a champion of this cause, most famous for giving people doing a call out for people to donate beer and marijuana to help them during a cold snap. um but also there, like as I said, there's been a lot of kind of, would say, almost like class warfare from
Yeah.
those sitting on city council. Do you have like any like I said, maybe just a bits of a summary of what has happened on that issue so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important question too, because when I say that it was a small victory, but a very significant one to allocate what was, I'm just double checking now, $200,000 to hire staff at the Wolf Street and Brock Mission. Um,
Okay.
two separate encampments for those who aren't in Peterborough. Not one's an encampment at the overflow shelter on Wolf Street, and the other is the Brock Mission. Wolf Street was open during the pandemic to house people who were unhoused. The $200,000 is double what was initially being requested in the final two meetings of last year to support housing projects for a coalition of community organizations. They were only asking for $100,000, and this money is coming from the same place. And so it's significant in that council voted to allocate this $200,000 when initially, not a month before, they were withholding the $100,000 to support a community coalition. So somehow Alex Burke managed to bring councillors. Historically, the councillors who would vote against such a motion would be Kevin Duguay, Leslie Parnell, Dave Hakey, and Andrew Beamer. They would be the main, and sometimes Baldwin and Riel. In fact, most of the time. Not to name them all by names, but I think their voting is all very public, and I think that would all associate them with people who might not be in favor of such a motion. So it's significant in that respect as well. As far as I can tell, this is the biggest thing that has really brought forward. This amounts to a 5.7% increase to homelessness funding in 2023, which is more than the increase to the police budget. So this is what I mean when it's really not as cut and dry as underfund. And this is something that I've really learned by going to City Hall, right, and interacting with these people on a weekly, sometimes multiple weekly basis. Is, when you actually sit down and talk with them, not to say I agree, I vehemently disagree with a lot of the decisions, but they have reason for the operations, right? And it's a winding, frustratingly slow process that we're bearing witness to here, right? And that's been difficult for me as a bystander to learn as a reporter, right? Because as some kind of activist, I want immediate action, but it's just not. It's like the long-term goals. And when I speak to certain counselors too, they always try to bring me back to the long-term implications, or the long game, which as a community member who's only getting sound bites from city council is extremely frustrating, right? And it's frustrating for me too, sitting in there and seeing this happen. But in terms of actual allocation of funds, there's, on a percentage basis, the council is allocating more funds to homelessness than the police.
Interesting.
Not in dollars, but in terms of percentage.
Right. Not even close to in dollars, but
not even close. No, it's like a 5-to-1 difference there. But yeah.
Yeah. I just want to prompt chat and ask if they have any questions for you as well. And I also just want to ask you, like, why do you think there has been this change of heart in the last, as you say, like, month or so? Like, they were like, hey, $100,000 is too much to save people's lives, but $200,000 is not too much when it comes to creating a couple new jobs.
I think the main reason why that is the case is because it has been framed as shifting money around the budget, right? So initially, when it was first proposed, it was money that would have just strictly come out and out of almost like a new budget line, to put it in a certain way, right? But this was money that they found within the budget, which they voted to take from the DBIA and then reallocate. And so I think that's the main thing, is that they're finding ways of moving the money around in a way that appeases the more conservative, fiscally conservative and socially conservative, oftentimes they're correlated, elements of the, imagine that, right? But the more conservative elements of council, this seemed like a really crude way of putting it would be a smart investment, right? It's like moving money around from one stock to another.
Okay.
Can effectively gain better results by investing the money in the shelters rather than the DBIA, right? Because the shelters and the people who work at the overflow shelter presumably have the expertise of how to work alongside those experiencing homelessness in our community. That would be
Okay.
my best guess, yeah. And based on my understandings of how these kind of conversations work behind closed doors, what counselors are willing to tell me, that would be my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we do have a question from chat. Before I get to it, Ribbert, apologies. I just want to say this while it's on my mind. Why do you think city council was unable to push back against the police increase? Like, I know the police, did they get an increase every year no matter what, because their salaries increase and the police union is very strong, and they kind of have city council by the and why, like, they get, I'm pretty sure, like a 1% or 1.5% increase no matter what, because salaries go up and city council has to pay their police. So, but like, why do you think when they kind of almost push back against this budget increase, and then they decided, oh yeah, sure, just like sign it off?
That is something that I've wondered, and based on conversations with counselors, I don't think at any point this wasn't going to just be approved as is. Um, I don't have a good answer other than to say there's a possibility that it's merely just public relations at this point, like it would look badly. There were delegations who came to state, like, let's consider ways of, similar to what I just discussed in terms of like taking money from the DBIA and reallocating it elsewhere to achieve a similar end. There were people at council, members of the community, coming forward to speak to a similar motion, but it was never entertained. Council has the they don't have to discuss something like that, right? Like they can choose to
Okay.
either receive it and then vote on it, or they can receive it and then have debate on it. And with the police budget, there was no debate. It was um, just straightforward acceptance. And I, based on conversations that I was having with counselors, kind of on background throughout this process, I would always ask, like, what's going on with the police budget? And they would always say, oh, no, don't it's not a thing that's going to really happen. And so it wasn't surprising,
Hmm.
based on what I knew. But I'm sort of in a very privileged position here in that I have rather unfettered access to the people making these decisions. And as a community member, I can imagine how striking that would be. The contrast between the debates on transit versus the police, right? So the
Yeah.
delay on the delay on the police budget sort of was largely symbolic, I would say. I never really
Okay.
anticipated it being anything other than largely symbolic.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Jeff Leal is a very polished politician, is what I've come
Right.
to learn. Yeah,
Okay.
he knows what he's doing,
I
and
see.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
guess
all
for
optics.
those who don't know, Jeff Leal is the former MP for Peterborough, and was, so yeah, he does have a lot of experience.
MPP.
Um,
He has a lot of experience, and a
yeah.
former city councilor as well for about almost 20 years
Oh, in Peterborough?
in Peterborough.
So
Yeah.
before he was MP, he was city councilor,
Yeah.
and then he's the mayor.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So
Yeah.
RJ Helms is also adding here that the Police Services Act lets the police appeal to the province if they don't get their increase, and they almost always win that appeal. So it sounds like, yeah, the municipality, if their hands are kind of tied. Ribbert is saying that Jeff Leal was the MPP, not MP.
Yeah. Yeah. He was the MPP.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Um and Ribbert also has some questions. What are your thoughts on Dave Hackey? Is it Hackey? How do you
Hey. Yeah.
Hakey. Okay.
Yeah.
On Dave Hakey being offended in the diversity debate.
Yeah. So I have a whole article about this sort of shameless debacle. For a little bit of background on this. Um, Joy LaChica, during a motion to sort of, there's something as per provincial legislation, the municipalities need to implement a community safety and wellness plan, or wellness and safety plan. I'm getting that mixed up, but more or less, there was a motion put forward to sort of receive a city staff report outlining what a future committee would have to look at, what their main priorities would be. And Joy
Yeah.
LaChica, town ward councillor, suggested the addition of identity, race and cultural identity as one of the main things. And she cited instances of violence and intimidation within our community based on race and cultural identity writ large, right? So she cited the intimidation of Betty Baker, the drag queen story time, the harassment of Jagmeet Singh during the previous provincial election. These kinds of things, which are expressly mounted upon hatred of someone for their race and or cultural identity.
Right. And these are very high profile cases too. Like
very, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of striking looking at the report that something like this wasn't being considered. So rather innocent enough motion to include something along these lines. There was some discussion back and forth of whether or not they should be consulting the diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, Rima Lee, before implementing such a motion. Ultimately, that's what came forward. They deferred the decision, so more or less, it's just let's stop this here until we hear from more people so we can make a more informed decision. It's called a deferral.
Okay.
So that ultimately passed, but during the discussion, Joy LaChica said, I'm speaking on this as a member of a racialized group and as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm paraphrasing here, but she said that this is the voice of the only non-white, non-male counselor, right?
Basically the only woman of color on council.
Yeah, is more or less what she said. And Dave Hakey, in sort of like a breaking from like general decorum, addressed Joy directly. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to direct all comments to the chair of the meeting. He said, "Joy, I will not apologize for being a white male," right? And this was kind of this was very much near the end of the meeting.
Okay, we can just take a second to laugh here because like nobody was asking him to apologize for being a white male.
No. Joy was stating a fact that she is the only racialized woman and member of the LGBTQ community she's non-white, non-male counselor. Stating a fact, which Dave Hakey took offense to. And this it was troubling to kind of bear witness to. It was very, very tense within the room. Not only during the rest of the meeting, but also following the meeting. There was a lot of emotions, as one might expect. And I think that what ended up happening from this is Alex Burke, again, his name seems to come up a lot when it comes to these progressive motions. That's either generally Joy or Alex who do this. He passed a motion which would make diversity, equity, and inclusion training mandatory for all members of council. And that's more or less what I focused on in the piece itself as the larger outcome of what was initially not a heated debate. It was a frustrating debate to bear witness to, because it's like, why can't we do both? Why can't we implement this change and hear from the equity officer, Rima Lee? It's frustrating on its face in that respect, but more or less it devolved into what could be classified as like a personal attack, given that he directly addressed her in a way which is not in keeping with decorum within the council.
You mean decorum was broken to directly attack the only woman of color on council, but also, no need to apologize for your whiteness or your maleness.
Right. Yeah, I naturally I feel for Dave Hakey for having to apologize, but I mean no one asked him to apologize. At the end of the day, no one asked him to apologize. And speaking as someone who was like in the room, and people can go and watch the footage, it was never stated. It's just classic white fragility, and a really kind of frustrating showing of just how deeply these issues are kind of informing the people who make rather pertinent decisions to our lives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. It's really funny because like now it does feel like he should apologize for saying that he doesn't need to
Yeah.
apologize. It's like he basically manufactured a situation where he needs to apologize now.
Yeah. No, he really, really should. And like, I think sometimes counselors forget that I'm a journalist when I'm in the rooms, and they'll have conversations right in front of me. And
Okay.
counselors were attempting to explain to Heike why equity is important, why equity is not necessarily equality, and why it's important that we amplify the voices of marginalized community members in certain instances. And he more or less kept saying, like, I feel very unequal right now, I think is what my hurriedly written notes would say. But
He
it's
feels
just
very unequal.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. But it's just so foolish. Imagine being part of a democratic process like city council where your vote counts the same as everybody else's, and
Mhm.
like feeling unequal for being one of the majority intersections that is represented on council, which is being like a white man.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of staggering the extent to which this was on display. It's not surprising, and I don't think anyone in the room, maybe aside from Dave Hickey, would say that it was surprising the way that this
Okay.
played out. But yeah, it was a rather troublesome reminder of just how much work needs to be done on these issues, and hopefully, when council does hear from uh, Rima Lee, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer of the City of Peterborough, some more discussion will transpire.
Okay.
It
Awesome.
needs to
Well,
happen. Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much. We've gone quite a bit over time, but maybe that 45-minute mark is a more realistic time allotment for kind of what we're going to expect with these segments. Is there anything else you want to say?
Oh, that's a good. I could go on for ages. I've become rather. I get very obsessive about things, and so
Yeah.
right now, municipal politics is like everything I think about. But also, I'll withhold myself for future discussions.
Okay.
Just to say that anyone can attend city council meetings if it's something that people are interested in doing. Typically, they're 6 o'clock on Monday evenings, and they also video stream them live on the city website, and they archive the video footage. So I think that it's really quite striking how transparent these processes are. Um, However, again, what I see myself doing my job is to distill 6 7 hour meetings into 2 or 3 digestible articles.
Yeah.
Um, but needless to say, it is rather transparent, and also delegations. People can go and speak to council
Right.
when,
As I believe many people in chat are
yeah,
familiar with. So,
if if I'm recognizing some of the names, yeah. I just
yeah.
wanted to give it, yeah, yeah.
I just also want to say, and maybe we can have this discussion afterwards or whatever, but like, I think, this is really something that gets me excited about municipal politics. Having this conversation, I think, is really important in a way that people can accessibly access some of this information. So definitely want to talk to you about potentially like turning this into like a podcast that can be on Arthur website, or even something that can be repurposed for Trent Radio, um, and all of that. In addition to being live here, I would love to make it something that is directly part of the Arthur community and not just the My Homie Tutaro community. So
It would be fantastic. Yeah,
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 we
because
should.
we both have a vested interest in Arthur. So and I'm sure
That's
some of the
right.
people that are fairly familiar with Arthur as well. But
Yeah.
read Arthur. I guess that's the final word on it. Read Arthur.
Read Arthur, that's right. If you do !SJL in chat, you can pull up all the recent articles from yourself, Sebastian. And if you also do !Arthur, you can find the donation link to donate to Trent Arthur. So please make sure we are funding independent student journalism, and making sure that people like Sebastian have, you know, a great way to have employment, and you really are doing a service to our city. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
thank
yeah, the last thing I want to say is thank you to chat for listening to this wonderful segment, and we'll be back next week at 11 o'clock. And there is a city council meeting on Monday, so we should have some new kind of like juicy tidbits to gossip about then.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for this, Danny. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on. I think it's gonna be a success. Like it's really important, I think, to reach people like where they're at, and not everybody reads the Arthur newspaper.
Mhm.
And so it's great if we could hit them on the airwaves or the podcast or the video stuff. I think that'll be great.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks to everyone watching.
Yeah, thanks for dabbling in the video journalism too. I think it's
Yeah,
important. Yeah,
absolutely. Broadening my horizons here.
that's right. All right, we'll see you next week.
All right, sounds good. Take
All
care.
right, you too.